good afternoon, depending on where you are, and welcome to our webinar on sustainability and sustainable business. My name's Charles Green. I'm part of the marketing team here at Globant, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's session. Sustainability has become one of the top priorities for organizations heading into 2021. At its heart, it gets to the issue of legitimacy. How will your customers, your stakeholders, your partners, and broader society view and engage with your company? So we believe that leaders can no longer view sustainability and climate change from a harm avoidance perspective. That means taking a new perspective and a new approach to achieve responsible business. And how to do that effectively and the steps and the processes that you need to take is the focus of today's webinar. And in today's session, if you have any questions whilst listening, please do let us know via the Q&A box in the Zoom. We would love to take your questions and to really start a conversation. We will definitely have some time at the end to take those questions. The format will be first a presentation, and then at the end, we'll be taking questions. Now, I don't want to delay any further and jump right into the session. So I'm delighted to welcome Elena Morettini, Director of Globant's Sustainable Business Studio, to the webinar. Elena, welcome.
Thank you, Charles. Well, good morning again and good afternoon to everybody who's with us today. Thanks a lot for being here. It's really a pleasure and somehow a happiness to share with you some info, some actions on the convergent journey between sustainability and digitalization from Globant. This is the way we see it. It's somehow a step one into a conversation and a dialogue on sharing and creating awareness on sustainability and climate in respect to digitalization. Not only in respect to digitalization, we'll see that this applies to many different industries. So it will be more of a general introduction to what we think this journey should be about. And then hopefully in the session of Q&A, we can actually discuss your opinions about this. And as I said, a step one in the sense that we hope that we will be able to organize more roundtables and open session and a transparent dialogue to build some sort of consensus and exchange, of course, ideas, which are always the best assets, especially in this developing subjects and sciences. Let me first of all, since it's people who do things, actually thank very much Charles Green, who's the leader of marketing in Globant, for being the facilitator and partner in this conversation. Sonia Pacheco and Beatriz Cortazar, who are leading the team of marketing and communications for Europe and Asia in Globant, because they really wanted to squeeze in this conversation before Christmas. So although schedules from everybody are very busy, they managed to do that. We have quite an audience, so thank you very much to all of you for being here. And indeed, let's take a look at what coding for climate can mean for all of us. So, of course. Okay, so who am I? Elena Morettini. I'm Italian. I'm a geologist by background with a PhD on geochemistry, specifically carbon isotope stratigraphy, doing some sort of a paleoclimatic reconstruction back then in the Jurassic or for the Jurassic times. Working experience 20 years plus, like 22, I think, in the oil and gas business, and many experiences while those 20 years went on, possibly the most significant of which has been, especially for this moving or upskilling towards energy transitions, which is my expertise nowadays, together with sustainability and climate change, was leading the B20 Energy Resource Efficiency and Sustainability Task Force for YPF back in 2018. That has actually created an awareness among energy companies of what those energy transitions needed to be in order to take care of climate. So this is quite a long text. What I would like to share with you with this slide is basically that we are entering a very specific and very special decade, the decade that the UN has named Decade of Action, in which already many companies, through their thought leadership of CEOs and boards, have embarked in themes that are very close to climate action. And that includes taking steps to reduce greenhouse gases emission, strengthen the resilience of the business they're leading, innovating in terms of low carbon technology, a very important part in all this business that we will talk about, and also preparing companies to a new set of rules, of processes, and of expertise. So it is very important that we take this whole thing together as a sort of integrated path towards sustainability. As I said before, the UN calls this the decade of action. Within this decade of action, there is a particular focus on people and leaders. Leaders have the role today to basically be strong and bold on the actions that a company is taking in terms of strategy. Although numbers do not always follow, what we see here is, according to the UN, 92% of CEOs do actually believe that sustainability is a critical path to their business success. But actually, when we go down to who is integrating that into their day-to-day action or long-term action in the strategy of a company, it's only 48%. And when we specifically link SDGs, i.e. Sustainable Development Goals, to the actions or the strategy of a company, we have that number further down to 21%. This also reflects a little bit what is the difference among the leaders nowadays. And I think that I like this classification very much, in which leaders are considered to be born believers. So the young ones, the millennials, who today have the sustainability and climate action very much embedded in their DNA. The convinced ones, I could classify easily myself as one of the absolutely convinced, and the awoken, those that are in the process of being somehow brought into the subject and are taking it on board as part of their business in a sort of maybe a little bit slower awakening. But I mean, we welcome everybody, and we need everybody definitely in this matter and in this path. So market today really has two powerful influencers. And on one side is sustainability, and on the other side is digitalization. I think that nobody has any doubt that these are the main trenders, trend-setting arguments and topics. So we do need to follow them, but there's still a lot of space in the convergence between the two. So this is what we're trying to fill in, this gap, this space. I mean, of course, it's not a gap for everybody. It's a gap for the majority of the industry, but there are some that are already leading it. But it is very important that we create an awareness on this convergency journey, and that we all take steps and actions in favor of this, so that sustainability and digitalization can go together and can go fast together. Because as we said, we really have not a lot of time. 10 years is not, I mean, 10 years, it's definitely 2 years of 2 sections of business plans for any given industry that is working on a 4 or 5 year plan. Important to say is that digitalization affects all aspects of our lives, how we work, how we live, and how we consume. The same thing applies to emission. There are emissions linked to every action we take. So we really need to find the positive convergence between the two in order to decrease emissions through technology. What are we going to look at today in this Coding for Climate webinar? We're going to be paying attention to the sound of science. This is how we call the necessary and needed attention that we need to give to science. And there are often dramatic consequences when we do not pay that type of attention. We're going to look at a part which is very dear to many of us, which is called financial disclosure. It is time that we link sustainability to finance, and that we disclose those numbers, because business out there is very big in terms of impact bonds and in terms of actions and investments that are done in this new green area and impact area. And what are actually the sustainable digital strategies that Globant has decided to take on board to tackle the issue. So some facts that are key to understanding why we need to take certain steps. First of all, we all need to remember, no matter which business we're working on, that to fix climate change, we need to fix energy. Energy is the main issue the main sector in terms of emissions, and the climate change problem is mostly an energy problem. Having said that, nobody should feel outside the relevance and the responsibility of this, because we all consume energy one way or the other, more renewable, less renewable type of energy. We're all very much involved with every action we take into an energy efficiency issue. So point one is not only the energy industry, it's everybody who's in the industry, basically the entire world with its population. Second point, which I think is fundamental, the climate change is a cumulative problem. So we are adding problems the way we move if we do not solve the issue of emission through technology, passive or active one. So it is really something that we need to understand, especially when we get told that those numbers of emission decrease. Well, actually, we already have so much concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere that the fact that we may diminish or decrease or slow down doesn't really have an effect or a beneficial immediate effect on climate change. So we need to be really aware that this is a cumulative problem. All people are created equal, not all emit the same. I think that this may need a webinar or a conversation on its own. It is just to say that, of course, there are different regions of emissions, but at the end, we all live under the same atmosphere. So even if there are different regions and different budget, the problem is common to everybody. Point D is particularly important, especially in these times. We've lived a very tough year, and the one to come still will need a lot of resilience on our behalf. Nature cannot be fooled in its physical limits, and we all need to take an action and understand that when we try to fool nature, the consequences do actually overwhelm us. And I think that it's also important to say that this pandemic that we've seen in the year 2020 can be dwarfed by extreme climate events. So we better think that there is no easy shelter when climate events become extreme. And of course, on the other hand, in this double dividend sort of view of the new economy, is that we have, of course, we have risks and risk management, which go from A to D, and we have revenues on the other side. So we have the possibility of building new economic models and a lot of business on the current investments done on sustainability and climate change. This is a slide, well, not a slide, a picture and a concept that I think it's particularly important. Again, it comes from the B20 2018 of Argentina. It's the definition of energy transitions and why they do really affect everybody. Energy transitions can be seen as a transformative social and economic path to foster adaptation of all energy systems. We've said that it's mainly an energy problem, to new rules of production, storage, transportation, distribution, and use of energy. So it really affects and concerns everybody and all of us. And we have a big responsibility coming from the technical industry, which is that we really need to apply and deploy the entire spectrum of scientific, technological, and of course, political solution to avoid furthering the issue and the problem of climate change. Sound of science. This is the only 2 moments in which we will talk a little bit more in depth about science. I'm sure that you will like it because it's a fascinating subject. This is what you're seeing here. It's actually the constant record of CO2 atmospheric concentration, which is recorded at the Mauna Loa Observatory. There is a tweet afterwards. You can actually go and check the tweets that are daily from the Mauna Loa Observatory. It's fascinating. They constantly measure through mass spectrometry the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere, which we see it's dramatically increasing year by year. So what you see here on top is a graph referring to 1 year, on the bottom, a graph referring to 2 years of recording of CO2 measurements. Of course, the graph on the top is 2020, the graph at the bottom is 2019 and 2020. And what you see is that despite the fact that we know that we've had a decrease in emissions during the months of March and April, I don't think I can point out things here, but eventually you will be able to see that below on the X axis, it's time. What you can see, it's actually that if you look at the peak at the middle of 2020, that peak is higher in respect to the peak of 2019. And the same happens for the sink. The lowest values of 2020 are higher than the lowest values of 2019. What does this mean? Very simply, that we keep on adding up CO2 to the atmosphere, and we're keeping increasing those values, of course, with a very big danger of what this does to temperature. So this is just a more complete set of graphs recording exactly the same. It's always time against concentration of CO2. And as I said before, you can go and check it on your own. It's called the Keeling curve, in honor to the greatest atmospheric physicist, who was David Keeling. So you will find all the records in Twitter every day, and you can see how those values vary according to time. What you see in all these graphs that basically represent times, geological times, I know there's many geologists in the audience, from 800,000 years till present, what you see is that there have been many fluctuations, but that the peak that we are reaching today and the rhythm, I mean, the velocity and the speed at which that peak was reached is out of scale in respect to everything which the planet has been experienced in the geological past. So if you want to take a look specifically at the graph which says 1700 2020, what you actually see is the steepness of the curve from the basically from the Industrial Revolution onward of the concentration of CO2. So we need to be very careful because the pace at which we are emitting CO2 in the atmosphere is dramatically high, and that triggers consequences that many times atmospheric scientists are not able to model. So that is another risk that we really need to take into account. We are not currently able to model what are the extreme consequences of an increase in temperature in the atmosphere. So why is this important? CO2 and global temperature have a correlation. It may not always be linear, but it's a correlation. So that is the graph to your left, or at least the graph in black. What you see to the right, or the graph in white, is basically the correlation between CO2 and time, as always presented by when we refer to the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement says that we need to keep temperature 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees below pre-industrial levels. And what you see here, although this is a bit complicated to show without a pointer, is what are the actual path that we're taking. So if you follow the black line, you'll see that we are increasing towards a value of temperature which is way above anything that is asked for and agreed in Paris. And the other two curves, the purple one and the blue one, are actually showing what we can accomplish if we start applying all the sustainable development goals and all the national determined contributions that we have actually signed up to, region by region, nation by nation. So we still have time, we still have this 10 years of time, but actually it's pretty dramatic and it's starting now. And this is possibly why we're talking about it right now, right? So financial disclosure. This is a slide that I've often been discussing with one of my dearest colleagues, Annabel Perrone, while we were working in IPF together, because this is actually showing what green bonds, so everything which is green energy or green actions, is taking in terms of share of the markets. So from 2007 until today, what we're seeing, it's an exponential growth of this finance sector, that of green bonds. And today we have reached the investments of 1 trillion. So for those that tell us many times that sustainability or green actions are nice to have and they're not linked to business, well, this is really the view that we need to eradicate somehow. We really need to explain that it is the new business, it is the new economy, and there is an absolute link between our financial numbers and the sustainable and climate actions that we're taking. One slide more on the same topic. TCFD may be an acronym that doesn't say much to many of you. We need to start getting acquainted with this acronym. It's a bit difficult. It's called Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure. It was a task force launched at the time of the Paris Agreement by Michael Bloomberg, a task force which has been very successful. Today, the biggest 1,200 companies in the world do actually pertain to the Task Force on Climate Financial Disclosure. Very simply, and that is what the graph is actually showing, what does this mean? This means that not only we need to relate the financial number of risk management against climate extreme happenings and the advantages that all these funds are actually bringing to us. So what we call the double dividend, the risk management of extreme climate occurrences, and on the other hand, the opportunity that this new green finance and green economy is bringing to us. So it is very important that we start bearing in mind that this is financial. This is actually concerning the financial part of our companies. We need to stay in tune and connected to the financial departments in order to disclose those numbers and have all our stakeholders and investors be aware of what each company is calculating in terms of risk management and what each company is seeing in financial terms in terms of opportunities. And we should all encourage the companies where we come from to be part of this task force. Again, again, on the same thing, ESG, environmental, social, and governance parameters. Financial Times 3 days ago encouraging technological company to start using artificial intelligence to in the quantitative part of environment, society, and governance parameters, so that we can speed up all those parameters, all those standards, all those KPIs, and have them part of financial and non-financial disclosure documents in each one of the company we work for. It is fundamental that we make those numbers transparent, so that stakeholders and investors can actually see what we're doing and how our financial system is behaving in terms of climate change and sustainability. So last, we promised to show you some of the actions that we're taking from Globant. Digital sustainable strategies, it's part of this convergence between sustainability and digitalization. It's divided in two parts. What the new studio, which is called Sustainability Business Studio, is actually proposing as products, lines of services, lines of action for all the companies that pertain to the sphere of Globant. And the second point, we've called it digital sovereignty. I think we like very much the name that we've given to everything, which basically is energy efficiency in the world of digitalization and technology. So just briefly taking you through that, as I said, we have a new studio, which is called Sustainable Business Studio. And what is important of this studio is that the commercial and marketing value behind it matches very well with sustainability and with climate change. So it's more of a vision, it's more of a mission that each company should have when we decide to apply or to use certain services on climate change and sustainability, which is basically always related to understanding the metrics behind it and understanding those parameters that we can measure. And again, as we've been saying, disclose. We measure things and we disclose those numbers. So the new services are divided into emissions, sustainability today, and up with climate. Those are numbers of fantasy. What we are trying to foster as a message is the need of awareness and readiness. Even if small companies do not have budget enough, especially in this very difficult year, to take on board some of the products, we're always ready to have some budget set aside for awareness and readiness. Also because I think that if we think that knowledge is expensive, possibly ignorance is way more expensive and more dramatic in terms of consequences in any of the companies we work for. So there's 3 lines of business: emissions, sustainability, and up with climate. What they're trying to do is provide climate change and sustainability awareness and readiness, which is also somehow what we're doing today. Measurements and roadmaps towards climate pledge objectives. We've heard a lot about climate neutrality, climate free, climate negative objectives. Each company can declare one, and we'll have to follow through metrics and roadmaps that sort of objective that many of the biggest companies have came out to declare. And up with climate refers to everything which deals with culture. So possibly the most important one in terms of providing digital, cognitive, and sustainable culture to go together and make the change we are all expecting. Digital sovereignty, as I said before, it's possibly the part where I'm least expert of, but it's also the one in which I'm more keen to start working and making the fusion between sustainability and digitalization. And that has to deal with the entire set of efficiency, energy efficiency that we can promote in terms of greener softwares, greener service architecture, supercomputing, and making them more sustainable. All the help we can get from big data interacting with this, the iterations of artificial intelligence and their consumed and consumption of energy. And of course, having in mind, especially for the hackers, that every algorithm counts and that we can save energy at every step of the creation of the new digital technology products. And in this respect, this is how we subdivide it. There's basically sovereignty that can be gained in experience, in data, in infrastructure. And we as technology company are definitely able to design new products that will help fostering this digital sovereignty and the energy efficiency that accompanies it and that it's needed in terms of reduction of emissions. And I think that with that, we have one last powerful message, which is that we hope that we can empower organization in terms of digital, cognitive, and also sustainable revolution. So
excellent. Thank you very much, Elena. It's been a fascinating presentation. So thank you very much for sharing your insights. Just a reminder to everyone, if you have any questions about what Elena's been presenting, please do let us know. We've been seeing a whole bunch of questions come in actually during the presentation, but if you do have any further questions, then now is your chance to ask. We'd love to start this conversation. So, Elena, as mentioned, we did have a whole bunch of questions which came in whilst you were talking. The first one was that you didn't mention too much about Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and Agenda 2030. Can you perhaps just give us a bit more detail about how you see them, why they're important for organizations?
Okay, yes, sure. I didn't mention it because possibly Sustainable Development Goals would need another talk on its own. I think that we all know that these are there are 17 goals that the United Nations has promoted through the very colorful periodic sort of table of the Agenda 2030. And that is basically helping companies to assess which is their field of influence and how they can tackle sustainable development coming from the sector of industry in which they're operating. Today, especially in because Energy Matters, which is a society that we founded in January, we have developed a methodology that deals with all of them together. And the reason why I'm saying this is not to make publicity to a company, but it's basically to understand that there is a need of a methodology that links together all the sustainable development goals. And so maybe until now, companies have taken on board a specific sustainable development goal and maybe disregarded all others. It is time that companies do actually look at the whole 17 of them, try to understand what is the nexus among them, trying to get rid of the negative counter effects that concentrating on one may have on others. So as I said before, Charles, it's a specific whole subject. It's important to know that it's a guidance from the United Nations. It's called Agenda 2030. We all need to know what it is about, but we also need to be aware that a methodology is needed to bring them forward and have companies today embracing the whole 17 of them. They're not many, 17, it's a reasonable and quite non-infinite number. And we can definitely take a look at all of them through a methodology, which is some sort of a simplified network or neural network of connecting all of them, so that we do not take only one, but we're very careful that by taking that one or some of them, we do not disregard the others, like poverties, like gender equity, etc., etc.
Excellent.
I hope I answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one question about regarding the presentation. Yes, absolutely. We will be sending as a follow-up, we'll be sending the recording plus the presentation to everyone who has registered for the webinar.
Sure.
We've got another question which has also just come in. You mentioned in your whilst you were speaking that technology is expensive, but ignorance is even more expensive. Can you give any example of what you mean there?
Well, actually, I wanted to say, but I think that the way you're saying it, it's actually better. What I meant to say was that that knowledge is expensive and ignorance is even more expensive. What this means basically is that if we do not get on board with the new knowledge, say, for example, energy transitions. Energy transition is a clear example through all its technology, which can be methane emission capturing, lowering flaring and venting in the oil and gas companies. If you do not take on board those actions, what happens to oil companies today is that they're left stranded and they're left outside of business because of all the movement of business and civil society and public governance as well in terms of emissions. So if you do not embrace that technology, which for example can be the reinjection of CO2 in the subsurface, again for all the geologists, geophysicists and engineers that are following us, that is a very expensive technology, that of reinjecting CO2 in the subsurface. At the same time, if you don't do that, or if you don't show that you're taking care of that as part of what was the previous problem of emissions, as an oil and gas company, you really run the risk of being left behind. So the expensiveness of that technology by no means compares to the risk that you're taking of remaining out of business or running that risk.
Okay, excellent. And also perhaps related to the question about technology, we have another question about green IT. So how do you see what you're proposing at the moment? Is that much different from perhaps the green IT initiatives that were quite prevalent, say 10 or 12 years ago, when there was this idea of focusing on more more efficient data centers, for example, or everything that was encompassing in green IT. So how do you see this as being different?
Maybe I don't want to give a long answer, but I think that there is a parallelism that we need to make again. The Kyoto Protocol back in 1997 was actually proposing things that we call today, like the CO2 reinjection, new techniques. Those techniques are not new if they're around in 1997. It's more than 25 years. So I'm not sure what happened during the 90s about green IT. But what I think is that definitely whatever happened, we need to take it on board again. We need to review it and make sure that we make it evolve to state-of-the-art technology in terms of, as I said before, I'm not an expert on the subject, but in terms of greening softwares, data centers, the energy that actually powers up all those centers, like geothermal energy. There's a lot of data centers that have been physically moved to regions in which energy is coming from geothermal energy. So all this type of actions specifically for the IT industry are those that possibly need to be sort of revitalized if they were already there 10 years ago, and make everyday action in terms of what we're doing for developing greener software, et cetera, algorithm, and that type of efficiency.
Okay, excellent. A further question regarding about sustainability and education. Do you think we're ready to introduce sustainability into educational systems worldwide to help save time for future generations?
100%, maybe more. We're ready and we need to do it. It's a must. There are many countries that are already doing that, and high school programs. There's university courses. There's a lot of university masters and specialized courses on this, of course, since about 10 years. But if we talk about lower education, I don't want to use the incorrect terms. I'm not an expert in education, but what I know is that we definitely need to introduce not only STEM, but every discipline relative to sustainability and the science behind it, which was a little bit what we were showing with the Sound of Science. I mean, the science behind sustainability needs to be taught at school since age 6 onwards, because, and I think it's actually done in very many countries. So as I said, I don't want to say something wrong. I just want to express my opinion about education on this. Education on this is fundamental and needs to be part of every scientific or near science program that we're pushing forward.
Okay, excellent. We have a question regarding the Sustainable Business Studio. I think we can probably take this as a bit of a follow-up. It's asking about your plans for the future and whether or not we're going to be hiring for the Sustainable Business Studio. So I think we can definitely follow up with the person asking the question. But perhaps you can share some of your plans for the studio, your vision perhaps for next year, where you see the studio going.
Let me say 2 things. There has been a lot of momentum within the company once the studio came up. So a very enthusiastic reaction from inside, from what I think that in technical terms, it's called the room. So inside the company, a very positive and enthusiastic reaction to wanting to be part in any respect to this new studio. And of course, we will be hiring, and there is a team that is going to be created around the services and around the whole culture movement that accompanies sustainability. Globant already had many initiatives. We know very well that Globant has declared carbon neutrality and renewable energy as the only source of power for the company. And now the studio is just one further advancement in that respect. But yes, we will be very careful about upskilling and reskilling the human resources that are needed in this new team, and definitely also looking for a lot of expertise in the market.
Okay. We have another question here, and that's about perhaps a bit more specific, but how can online retail businesses reduce energy emissions, given the fact that transportation plays a very important part for growing globally and to reach more and more customers? Of course, they're going to be needing to do more transportation. So do you have any advice for, say, an online retailer?
Not really. Not really. I don't want to say things that may be completely wrong, because it's not something that I have put my head into thinking. What I can tell you is that many companies are already offering online, and the original idea came from retail companies, are offering online a way to offset anything you're buying online. And I think that type of action and strategy of promoting carbon offtake by adding maybe 10 cents over euro to your buy, it's a very good one, at least to make awareness and culture. Then we can discuss the technical, the business behind it, see who is gaining and by adding those extra 10 cents. But in terms of culture, in terms of awareness, in terms of thinking that any buy I make will add some sort of emission through transportation or through the way I buy it, I think it's fundamental in terms of mindset and culture.
Okay. We have another question here about customer demands and client expectations. So, for example, in Europe, clients are willing to pay more for their energy if it's green, and for their products if they are bio. How do you see client expectations, changing and evolving post the pandemic? Do you think it's going to become a more global trend, or is this more like a Western European type trend?
I think it's a global change. I think we have elements and data to start saying that this is not only Europe or Western Europe. We're seeing changes in the new cabinet of the United States. We see a lot of interest in the LATAM region. And actually, let me say one thing. Those regions that have not been promoting, so that have not been leaders in sort of green energy, to call it somehow, or energy transitions, but have been followers, have a great chance of a leapfrog jump in terms of acquiring best practice technology or best practices in general. So I do not think that, despite the fact that we know that Europe is leading, that Europe has been pushing for this big time, that Ursula von der Leyen is doing an incredible job in terms of just transition mechanism and pushing for the Green European deal. At the same time, from those practices, many other regions in the world can trigger a very fast momentum to take on board those actions and actually do a jump, avoiding many of the mistakes that the world that has been promoting that. And of course, when you're a leader and there's nothing else out there, it's pretty much a trial and error process. So those that are actually followers today, so specific areas of the world that may not be as advanced in terms of ruling, governance and politics as is Western Europe or Europe in general, can still have a great chance of not making the same mistakes that we as Europeans have made. So I think that there is a lot of win-win situations, and there is a lot of pushing on behalf of the civil society, which basically makes it possible, doable and a must everywhere in the world. I know I'm a very optimistic thinker in this respect, but I think that it is a beautiful subject, and there is a lot of momentum on behalf of the new generations, and that is absolutely global.
Okay. We're getting a lot of questions coming in, but I think I'm going to take just one or two more. If we don't get to all the questions today, we will follow up with people individually. So the next question is, why is it important that companies that want to become sustainable, that they also consider cultural transformation? Are there particular practices and capabilities that are essential to promote this change?
Okay. It's a complex question. Again, we could have a full debate on this, because what we think is that it's like saying in Italian, you say nessuno si salva solo. Nobody can save himself on his own. I'm sure that there is a better English translation to that. That means that basically we need to integrate. So we need to integrate the carbon management part of all this climate change issue and sustainability to the human dimension, to the growth in humanity. So we really, and this is also at the core of the just transition mechanism, where we know that there is not a human asset that can be left stranded. So it's definitely an integration which is needed among different disciplines, some of them that we may consider completely apart one from the other. Definitely not the human resources one, we never consider a part of anything. But I mean, in general terms, the networking and the integration needs to be done across discipline in an absolutely multidisciplinary environment with disciplines that may seem to have nothing in common. You will need to have governance coming from lawyers to regulate what is biomolecular engineering, and different subjects and different professional figures need to find a common language when they talk about sustainability. So definitely culture is the drive. culture is the most difficult, but it's possibly the aspect that once it has started to change, it will possibly bring about the transformation much faster than any other specific and singled out actions. And of course, there are KPIs for culture, there are metrics for culture, and it's a big discussion on which are the cultural standards that you actually need to promote. One of them absolutely is diversity and inclusion. There cannot be a just transition mechanism if that is only done by the same old people. It's definitely a matter of diversity and inclusion, also because, as we said, it's a global message that needs to be spread. So culture has KPI, has tangible objectives and deliverables in terms of transformation, and every company needs to sit down and write their own, with our help, with the help of any other knowledge partners, but it's absolutely doable, and KPIs are already there. So cultural standards are there to be used.
Okay, and so I just want to take one final question. I know we've got some more and some other comments coming in as well. As mentioned, we will follow up with everyone. Just the final question is that, how is Globant working to help companies incorporate and enhance sustainability? I know you mentioned a little bit about services, but perhaps you can give a bit more context as to how we're starting to work with organizations.
We're working on it. We're working on the time frame and on what to tackle first. The products are the one that you've seen. There's actually many more in the process of in the creation and creative process. We think that there is a lot that we can work in terms of business intelligence, trying to compare companies and understand who is doing the best practices and where. But in terms of how Globant can help other companies, we're starting, we think that the focus of attention is awareness, and awareness is coming from two sides, is top down and bottom up. So we are hoping to tackle the upper management, the CEO suite, and at the same time with information sessions, with webinars, with workshops, with technical lunches, whatever is the form that suits the best, because of course the upper management is always overwhelmed by a big deal of information. We hope that we can screen them for them and give them the most practical information in terms of climate change and the business aspect of climate change and sustainability, so that it can be embedded in their strategies right away. And at the same time, there is a sort of a learning or e-learning, we will see in which form, but training and awareness sessions for the entire company that basically creates awareness in terms of low carbon economy, business legitimacy, and climate finance. So we're trying to tackle top down, bottom up, so that together they come at a convergence in which the entire company gets the needed awareness. Because sustainability, it's a business which is absolutely transversal and horizontal. There is not one single product that will stay out of a better sustainability version of itself.
Okay, thank you for the detailed answers to all the many questions which we're receiving. I want to now bring the session to a close. I know we're at the end of our time. As mentioned, we will be following up with everyone. We will be sharing a recording of the session plus the presentation. I want to say, thank you to everyone for taking the time. Thank you very much to Elena for sharing your thoughts and your insights and your expertise today. Would you have any final comments that you would like to leave the audience with?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Charles. Thanks everybody for organizing this, and for all the participants for taking time on the 22nd of December. Final thought, well, I think that dialogue and consensus is the best way of saving energy in general terms. So I think that if we can get together and discuss these matters so that they become the strategic pillar behind business in many of the private and public sectors, I think that could be a big step forward for somehow a better world. Maybe trivial, but I really believe that.
So it's a great thought to leave the presentation with, and a great thought to head into 2021 with. So with that, thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Elena, once again. We'll be sharing the recording. With that, wish everyone a very pleasant rest of the day.
Thank you, Charles. Thanks a lot.